You're watching memorable entertainment television. MeTV Tri-State.
Broke the story on local homestead tax credit fiasco. Expose the Evansville Redevelopment Commission excessive spending habits.
Your community watchdog. CityCountyObserver.com is your online community newspaper dedicated to the progress of Evansville and Vanderburgh County. We're a nonpartisan publication providing insight into political issues and events that shape our community. We are a watchdog for you, the citizen. Check us out online, city-countyobserver.com. That's city-countyobserver.com.
Tri-State Voices, an open discussion with area leaders on issues affecting communities throughout the Tri-State. Now, here's your host, Mike Woods.
Good morning. Welcome to Tri-State Voices. Hi, I'm your host, Mike Woods. Tri-State Voices is jointly sponsored by WTSN, the City County Observer, and my office, Woods & Woods. Every week we interview a different person that has issues that are important to the Tri-State area. Today I'm honored to have the Sheriff of Vanderburgh County, Dave Wedding, here. Dave has been with the Sheriff's Department for 33 years. In that time, he's supervised or worked in every single department of the Sheriff's office. He's been in juvenile, worked with the dogs, the Sheriff's Department, and serious violent crime. Dave's particular emphasis is probably in not just catching criminals after they've committed an act, but when you listen to him, he likes to talk about how we work to prevent crime. Dave, I've known all the sheriffs in Vanderburgh County for about 40 years now. And in that time, you're more interested in a more proactive approach to crime than anybody I've ever met. You've been particularly involved in the Albion Fellows Bacon Center. Just tell me in your own words, how is being active in the Albion Fellows Bacon Center important to the Sheriff's Department? I mean, are those two issues connected or not connected?
Oh, it's certainly connected. Years ago, if you regress back approximately 40 or so years ago, domestic violence in the home place wasn't really even considered a crime. Oftentimes a person would assault their spouse or one of their children, and law enforcement would show up and really do little, if anything, when these assaults occurred because it was a family issue. Well, after this went on for years and years, people found out that this is a crime. It's a true assault and it needs to be treated like a crime. So the courts got together, the prosecutors, and then advocacy centers like the Albion Fellows got together and said, you know, enough's enough. We need to start protecting people. We need to start working with our courts, our law enforcement, and protect the victims of these assaults. Here in Evansville and Vanderburgh County, we do have the Albion Fellows Bacon Center, and the Sheriff's Office has a long history of working alongside them to help victims. Years ago, when I was in our training section, I was approached by a woman who had a grant written for her, but she really didn't know how to bring people together to train officers and lay people together on things like violence in the home. And I told her, well, if she had the money, I'd be more than happy to spend it for her. So I gathered law enforcement from around the area. We went to Warwick County and Posey, Gibson, the Evansville Police Department, and we got lay people in and around our area. And we held a large training function, and it really worked out well because we start teaching people how to treat victims of domestic assaults.
You know, when I was a prosecutor, one of the biggest problems we had with domestic violence is the people frequently, you'd meet up with them in the hospital or something, and been seriously injured, and then they'd go right back with the defendant. You couldn't get them to prosecute, and then 2 or 3 months later it'd be the same thing. It'd be a cycle, and it seems like Albion Fellows Bacon Center gets the victim away from the criminal, and then they're more likely to file the criminal charges. You kind of free them from the vicious cycle.
That's true. What they do, they offer hope to people, and sometimes without hope, people stay in that vicious cycle of abuse, and oftentimes they're manipulated by their spouse or boyfriends or the person who they reside with. Albion gives them a place, number one, for shelter and protection. And then they educate them, you know, here's options that you need to do. Here's how we can prosecute this person and keep yourself safe. Oftentimes people don't realize that not only is the victim of domestic violence at risk, but generally their children are really at risk because they're witnessing this behavior, so it has a lifelong impact on them. And sometimes these people that witness these attacks in their homes, they become people who are the perpetrator of the crime as they get older and become adults. So we're trying to breed that out of our homes, and we hope that we can eventually erase domestic violence. And we know we got a lot of work to do, but Albion certainly offers people hope.
You've really stressed that it's not just enough to catch criminals after the crime, but we need to do more and more and more to prevent crime. And of course, the work with Albion Fellow Bacon Center kind of describes that. But you've also done a lot with 9/11 Gives Hope, the Dragon Boat races, and I know you've sponsored one of those for quite a few years. Many youth programs, the DARE program, that sort of thing. How do you see all those programs winding into and tying into the Sheriff's Department?
Well, I think the Sheriff's Office, the Police Department, we're community people. And as you rise up in ranks, like the Chief Deputy of the Sheriff or the Police Chief, the Evansville Fire Department Chief, we need to be active leaders in our community. I mean, people look up to us. And we also have the ability to raise funds for organizations and clubs that will help out people in need. I've always had an affinity towards the Santa Claus Club because it's a children's charity. It's always been dear to my heart. Years ago, when my children were in high school and they did their senior project, I had them do a fundraiser for the Santa Claus Club. And as we did that, I found out how tough it was for a child or a high school age kid to try to raise money for an organization. But I knew with me and my stature in the Sheriff's Office, I had a little more leverage to go out and raise funds. And I've used that leverage to bring lots of money to the Santa Claus Club, and I'm proud that we have done that. But, you know, we also work with clubs like Leadership Evansville, the 911 Gives Hope, which is an organization that gives lots of money to the youth of our community. I mean, we've given out hundreds of thousands of dollars to the youth. And I mean, the 911 Gives Hope is a tremendous organization.
Well, tell me about that. What is the 911 Gives Hope?
Well, it started out years ago where the police department and the fire department had seen around the country that they had these boxing matches involving firefighters and police officers. And that's always an interesting dilemma because oftentimes people want to see the policemen beaten up by the firefighters, so it draws a pretty good crowd. And then we have Eagles involved with the firefighters and policemen. So they had set up a fight. It was called Guns and Hoses, and it was going to be held at the Coliseum. And I was listening and hearing bits and pieces of this, and I thought, you know, this is a pretty interesting concept. So I contacted the people involved, like Billy Bolin and Pat Furnett, and I said, I'd like to get on board with this. Can I volunteer in some way? And they said, yeah, we need somebody to work the door. And I thought, you know, 500 people would show up, you know, watch a few firemen and policemen beat each other up, you know. But we literally had people beating the doors down to get in. We sold out. We were trying to find people, standing room only crowd. And after we did the very first fight, we knew we had something that was going to be successful. So I started attending the meetings. I started bringing money to the table, start helping them, because it's a long process. You know, the fights are one night, but we raise money throughout the year. It's grown. I mean, it's kind of a normal thing for us to give near $100,000 to local charities each year, so I'm pretty proud of that. They've got a great group of people, and it's firefighters, police officers, sheriff's deputies, and people with the EMS. And then we have a lot of civilians that get on board and help. People from the media get involved. So it's a very collaborative effort, but we are bringing money to the table, and it's going to a very good cause.
You talked a minute ago about the DARE program. Let me ask you, when I was a prosecutor, it's been 30 years ago, we'd see an occasional meth lab, but really not very many, maybe one a month, if that many. It was kind of a big deal when they busted a meth lab. Now, they're busting meth labs just constantly. I mean, it's just, there's no end to it. Is DARE achieving the results you wanted, or should that program be modified somehow or another?
Well, people have different angles with what the DARE program does, but one thing I can say 100% is it allows us to put deputies in our schools. We do give an anti-drug and alcohol program to the kids, but more importantly, we build relationships with these children, and I think they're lifelong relationships. Brad Ellsworth, our former sheriff and congressman, he was a DARE officer years ago, and I remember when he became sheriff, he had children that were now 21 years old that he had as a DARE student, and they remembered him, and they came up and talked to him and treated him like a parent. And it was interesting to see the effect he had on the children. So I think if you build trust and you build a bond, it will maybe help ease these people away from poor choices. And more importantly, they may call us with the tip saying, guess what, I know something that's wrong I would like for you to take a look at. And they might be afraid to call someone else, but now we've built that bond. It also gives our deputies a chance to see kids who might be in trouble and are afraid to get help, and they will go to them and help them out. So anytime we can get a law enforcement officer into our school system, I think it's a win for everyone. And you know, we do picnics throughout the year where we bring the school kids out and they hang out with the sheriff's office employees, and we do canine demos and firearms presentations, and they get a day out of school, and they love it, and they get to interact with law enforcement, and we become their friends. And I think that's very important, working with our youth, because our youth are either going to be something that's profound to help our community down the road, or they can be the people that we're going to see in jail. And I'd rather see them work alongside law enforcement and become productive members of our community.
You mentioned a minute ago about Chief Boland. I know you're the Democrat sheriff. He's appointed by the Republican administration, obviously appointed by Mayor Winnicky. But it seems like you guys do a lot of joint programs together and you operate pretty seamlessly in spite of the fact you're from different political parties.
Yeah, I think in this day and age, people have to set aside politics. If you're a person who just judges people by a Democrat or Republican, I call you a loser, period. Billy and I have a great relationship, and once again, we have trust. If I call Billy with the problem, I know he's there for me, and likewise, if he calls me, I will take care of him. What we have done over the years is we've combined our resources, like in Joint Drug Task Force, cyber crimes, in just traffic safety programs, and without helping each other, we can't get the mission accomplished. So it's nice to know that we have a partner with the Evansville Police Department to work with and utilize their resources, they utilize ours, and we work together. And some of that is like our school threat assessment teams that we have worked very hard on to ensure that our schools are safer places for our children.
You also have to work with the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency, the FBI, Joint Task Forces, state police, and that sort of thing. And I was wondering, how do you guys coordinate that? Because like in Evansville, the Vanderburgh County, we don't have consolidation. So a crime in the county is going to be generally investigated by the Sheriff's Department. It's generally going to be the city police. And then you've got, obviously, crimes that are committed in other counties, but it's by the same people commit crimes here. So you got maybe somebody committed a crime in Posey County and Warwick County within the city limits of Evansville, and then outside the city limits, but still in Vanderburgh County. Is that difficult to coordinate all those different agencies, police forces?
Well, I would say here in southern Indiana that we're pretty fortunate to have cooperation with all of our law enforcement, both in Vanderburgh County and outside. And I do want to give a quick shout out to the Indiana State Police. Under Lieutenant Dennis Marshall, we formed a great working relationship that some communities don't have. Oftentimes, a sheriff's office and a state police post, they may have trouble amongst themselves, but Dennis was a true friend of the sheriff's office, and I always commend him for the work that he did with us to open up our relationships. And now we have Lieutenant Bailey, who also, I mean, we work so well together. We are also fortunate that Sheriff Cruz over in Warwick County, Sheriff Oath in Posey County, and even Sheriff Ballard. So everybody around us, we're just a phone call or an email away, and we work together because that's what it takes, because criminals are mobile, and the ones that are committing crimes in Posey County will come to Vanderburgh County to commit crime, and vice versa. So we have to keep open communications. Our deputies and police officers and troopers have to work together to win this war against the crime and the dirtbags out there.
Okay. I'd like to talk to you a minute, I'm going to shift gears about how your office is organized. I'm not sure how many people realize how big the Sheriff's Department is. I mean, it's huge. You have, if I remember the numbers correct, about 108 deputies, about 250 total employees, a budget of about 15 million people, and then you've got one of the biggest jails in Indiana. It's the size of some small prisons. I mean, you've got a capacity, I think, of 512 people or something like that. And generally, the jail runs right at or slightly above capacity. So if you just give me an overview, how's it organized? Like what divisions? You got major crimes, juveniles, and all that sort of thing.
Okay, well, with an office our size, and we are, as far as deputy sheriffs, we're about the 4th largest office in the state, and our jail is about the 6th largest jail in the state of Indiana. But the office is ran by merit deputy sheriffs who do various tasks. We patrol, we do narcotic work, criminal investigations work, school resource work, court security. People tend to forget about how important it is to protect our courts and the civic center. We have a large number of deputies and civilian staff down there to protect our courts and our civic center. The jail, with an inmate population of over 500, is certainly a challenge for the sheriff's office. We tried to work with at least minimum staffing. Sometimes we don't even reach that because of budget constraints. But year after year, the state jail inspector calls us a model jail. So we're very proud of the fact that we have been recognized by the state as a model jail. We have a large jail where we have 64 people in a housing unit, so that can certainly be problematic because sometimes people don't get along. But we try to maintain reasonable safety and security in there. We have a medical section in there. You know, we have a person who takes care of religious needs. Chaplain Wood does a very good job when people want to reach out to talk to him about their religious faith. We have a food service in there. We do laundry in there. So it's like a small city inside the jail.
The jail has capacity issues. I mean, you're operating right at capacity on the thing, which again, I think is about 512. I know you've done a lot of steps to try to reduce that capacity. One of them, you've arranged for, I think, judges to actually come in on the weekends to see if bond can be set for some of those people. Is that right?
Yeah, well, you know, once again, years ago, when you had a weekend arrest, people would literally sit in jail for a couple of days before they had a chance to get to court. What we have done, we've worked with the prosecutor's office and the judicial system to have a judge come out. We call it paper court, and we send a deputy prosecutor out there and a judge, and they review all the fresh arrests to determine if that person's eligible for bond and/or if they can be released on their own recognizance. That has helped keep the flow of inmates in and out at a reasonable pace, and we hope to continue doing that to control our inmate population.
So that paper court, that'd be like somebody got picked up on, say, a public intoxication charge. They don't have any prior records, so the next day they sober up. The judge looks at it and they turn them loose so you could clear out the jail.
Sure, and oftentimes, yeah, we have people that get arrested for just making poor choices. They're not really violent offenders or causing serious problems. They just chose to do something stupid, and it caused them to land themselves in jail. So
fair amount of it alcohol related?
A lot of people that are arrested are usually under the influence of drugs or alcohol.
When I was a prosecutor, I thought if they eliminated drugs and alcohol, that'd be the end of my job.
Yeah, well, yeah, we would have a lot of vacancies without alcohol and drugs, that's for sure.
Well, get laid off. You guys are also using electronic tracking devices. How do those things work? If somebody's supposed to be on house arrest, not leave their home, then that thing will go off if they try to leave?
Yeah, the electronic housing devices are done by an outside resource or a vendor. The sheriff's office, we don't actually do that, but oftentimes these people may be sentenced by a judge to electronic housing detention. And what they do, they monitor these people, and sometimes there may be some transition periods where they might be on a work release or something, but the ones who are truly on electronic housing, they go out to work, but they are monitored 24 hours a day, 7 days a week by a vendor, and they can pretty well set up geographical boundaries to say, you know, if you get outside these geographical boundaries, we will be alerted, and then you have to answer to that. So it's a good way to have, you know, low-level offenders still go to work so they can earn a paycheck and support their families instead of draining the system even more. So anytime we can take a low-level offender and keep them working and supporting their families, we encourage our courts to do that.
When you talk about a low-level offender that would be eligible for the electronic tracking program, what kind of criminals are you talking about?
Well, you know, they could be people with chronic driving history, you know, suspended driving license, people who like alcohol issues, maybe some minor theft-related charges, you know, some continual possessions of marijuana and things like that. So just your low-level offenses, you know, they're crimes.
Non-violent.
Yeah, but they're non-violent crimes.
And then who would be ineligible for that program?
Well, anybody who might be charged with a sexual battery, sexual offense, and/or a violent crime would not be eligible.
Okay, so they're actually going to hurt somebody as opposed to almost being a nuisance kind of a deal?
That's true. And once again, with anyone that's in our system, we can't predict what they're going to do when they're out in the public, because you may have a low-level offender that goes out and gets in big trouble when they're out. But you have to take some risk to get people trying to make them productive members of society, because you just can't lock everybody up for a period of time and then just throw them back out in the street, because they would never get anywhere. So we try with other people in our community to get them back working or being productive members of society instead of being a drain on our society.
When I was a prosecutor, one of the biggest problems we had with repeat people was some of them, they weren't criminals in the true sense of the word. They were just simply mentally ill. And we always had a difficult time trying to figure out what to do with those people. You know what? If you were their neighbor, they drive you crazy, but they're not really dangerous. You can't let them continue on that kind of behavior, but then maybe they're not covered under health insurance, so you can't get them in a mental hospital. The jail's not really a good place for somebody that's mentally ill. There's not really still a good answer for all that, is there?
No, and I wish there was an answer, because even years ago, people in Evansville remember the Evansville State Hospital was a fairly large institution that housed many mentally ill people from our community. Oftentimes they would be at Welborn M3, and then we would be ordered to take them from Welborn M3 to the state hospital. And we did this on a daily basis, so they held a lot of people for us. Presently, the beds are not available for mentally ill people, so oftentimes these mentally ill people end up in jail because they've committed a crime, and the crime was basically based on their mental illness, not because they did something with malice. They just didn't know better, but it qualified for a crime under the Indiana statute. Now we get them in jail, then they have to be evaluated, they have to have hearings, then we have to find bed space in institutions that are just packed. So oftentimes we may keep an inmate in custody that doesn't really belong in jail for months, and it is very tough on our staff.
Well, tough on the staff, and then in the long run, you wonder where it's putting that person mentally. I mean, that's not the best atmosphere in the world for somebody that's mentally ill.
Yeah, they cannot get the proper treatment in our jail because we're not equipped to handle severely mentally challenged people. But we work with our judges, we work with our prosecutor, and we are always working. But if space isn't available and there's nowhere to put them, then they basically say, hey, Sheriff, you're going to have to hold them until we find out what to do with them. And that's what we do.
You've mentioned a couple times working with the prosecutor, Nick Herman, and working with the judges. And one of the things I was curious about, you guys are trying to work through the new sentencing guidelines, and I'm not sure anybody really knows how that's going to affect it, but generally the low-level felonies, the state's not going to take them anymore. They're going to stay at the local county jail. Do you really know how, at this point, how much that's going to increase your number of inmates?
Well, we don't have a true number, but what has happened is that they've taken the old statutes and had like crimes that were maybe like an A, B, C, or D felony, and they put them to like a level 1 through 6. Now the lower level numbered charges now, they will want them sentenced to the Vanderburgh County Confinement Center. They will not even take them in the Department of Corrections. So we don't know how that will impact us totally, but we do know that it may have a very significant impact on our total inmate population. I've met with various judges, including Judge Kiley and Judge Trotman. I've met with Prosecutor Herman to start developing a plan, because we want to try and be ahead of this thing. One of our biggest dilemmas we face is we don't know where the funding source will come from, and that's going to be a challenge for me to say, I don't mind housing these people if they need to be in jail, but I hope there's money appropriated so we can pay for the housing.
And so far, the states, they changed sentencing guidelines, but they've not given the money for the county to carry that out.
We haven't seen anything really in writing that says, hey, you will be awarded a sum of money to handle the new number of prisoners that will be here versus the Department of Corrections. So, and hopefully we can get that worked out. But I believe I will continue to work with our local government. Like, we have a great group of judges, a good prosecutor, and probation department. We will work with everybody in our community corrections, and we'll figure it out. But it's going to take a lot of work, but we'll get in there and figure it out.
Now, in addition to jail, you've got a whole community corrections. system. Would you explain what the difference between the community corrections and the jail program is?
Well, community correction is basically an alternative to sentencing someone to the Department of Correction or the confinement center. What it does, it gives a person a chance to go out and be supervised by one of our staff members, and they basically help them find jobs and get them placed in the community, and then they monitor them, and there's a fee they pay to be housed in our community corrections center, but they go out and work and they earn a wage. And then they usually will work their way out to where, you know, they'll be sentenced there where they have very free, if any, or any free time. And as time goes on, we start allowing them to maybe spend a weekend with their family or maybe some evenings, and then they work their way out back into the community. So it's a good alternative choice to housing somebody in jail and, once again, draining us. We can have them out working and paying back their debt much sooner.
Where is that community corrections program?
The Community Corrections Center is located on our campus at the confinement
Okay, it's
center.
out there where the jail is?
Yes, it's on the same campus.
All right. And so what is that building there? Is it less security than a jail, or?
Yeah, I mean, we have security there, and we have areas that they're kind of somewhat locked up in, and we're monitored, but the restrictions aren't anything like a jail because, number one, they're free to go to work. And they're free to go out searching for jobs. So they get passes, they go out. So they're out in our community, but then they have to report back each day or at whatever time is given. They must report back.
Okay, and again, that would be also a reentry program. So people have actually been in prison, they've maybe served 80% of their term or something, and then they come back?
Yeah, we have a transition program with the Department of Correction while they're still under the Department of Correction, but they will send X amount of inmates to us and try to help transition them back into the community.
Okay, so it seems like you're doing all kind of programs to try to lessen that burden on the jail, but you wonder at some point what's going to happen in the future with the new sentencing guidelines and all the rest of it, because the county budget is getting pretty squeezed. I can't imagine you getting any more money to expand the jail. That's not going to happen.
It's tough. I mean, anytime you talk about jail expansion or building a new jail, you have to talk about where's the money coming from, and oftentimes it's taxpayers, and most people really don't want their taxes to go up. They don't want to pay for things like that. So it's a difficult balance for us in the sheriff's office to figure out, well, do you want the offenders held accountable for their action, or do you want them out on the streets? So I think if you're a victim of a crime, you're more apt to say, I want this person in jail. If you're not a victim of a crime, then you say, I don't want to pay to have a person in jail. So there's a balance there, and we just try to make sure we have a place, because I don't want any violent offender or a person I feel shouldn't be on the street to reoffend out. We need to keep a certain level of offenders in custody.
Sheriff, we really enjoyed you being here today. It's been interesting to talk to you. If you're elected in November, what do you hope to accomplish over the next 4 years?
Well, what I want to do, I want to ensure that we have a better quality of life for the people in my community. I want to make sure that we work with our schools and our workplaces to combat the problems of workplace and school violence. So we will continue to do threat assessments both in our schools and our workplaces. I want to educate citizens to take care of themselves, to be proactive in the communities in which they live and serve. They can be our eyes and ears and help us stop crime, because law enforcement cannot be everywhere. We can't protect every single person or business, so we want the community to partner with us to make our community a safer place. One other thing, I want to make sure we work very diligently with youth, so we work on our traffic safety programs to try to reduce the chance of serious bodily injuries and crashes.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed you being here today. Thanks for joining our show. Next week, we're going to have Holly Sullivan, the state representative, with us. See you then.
This year in the Tri-State, 1 out of 8 people will be in an accident.
Would you know what to do?
Pain and suffering, lost time if you're working.
When you call Woods & Woods, you are not a statistic. You are our client, and we will fight to get the money you deserve.
If you're in an accident, call Woods & Woods if you want justice.
If you've been injured, call 1-800-544-2108.
Let Woods & Woods work for you. You don't owe us a dime unless we win your case.
You're watching Memorable Entertainment Television. MeTV Tri-State.